Hi, I'm Angela McKinney, and I'm here with George Van Horn and Bill Jenson to talk about some really promising practices happening at Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. So welcome.
Good to be here.
Tell me about the history that Bartholomew Consolidated has taken through this journey in implementing universal design for learning.
Well, I think our real first step into universal design for learning started with a focus on special education and looking at instructional service delivery. We worked with Dr. Sandy Cole from Indiana University to help us kind of examine and reflect on how we made instructional decisions for students. And as we moved forward, we began to really look at how we make decisions for all students. And we had the opportunity through patents to have one of our elementary schools selected as a pilot site, and they began studying using the book Teaching Every Student in the Digital Age by CAST as a book study, and really looking at their practices and how it related to all students and how universal design for learning could be used kind of to change our schools. And as the years went on, we had a few more schools selected as pilot sites, and people really began to embrace the notion of universal design for learning and looking at it as a framework for our learning environments. And as time went on, Bill got involved because we had some middle schools, or one of our middle schools was selected as a pilot site, and he really felt like this was a good framework for our district. Our elementary director at the time, Karen Garrity, through some work we were doing with high ability students and parents, really felt like UDL seemed to kind of address the issue of how do we provide good quality instruction for high ability students in every district, every classroom in the district. So the three of us came together and really began to look at UDL as a framework for everything we do in all our students. And again, had that conversation, and our superintendent, Dr. Quick, supported that notion, as well as our school board. So as we've evolved, our whole district, including our school board and superintendent, have really embraced universal design for learning. And probably a great example of how our school board has embraced it is we recently have gone through a superintendent search, and much of the application materials and promotional materials in recruiting candidates included universal design for learning. And I'm not sure if I know of any other district in the country that has included universal design for learning as part of their superintendent search. So it's a really, I think, rich part of our culture and how we do things here. But it's been a long journey. It's been a 10+ year journey. We have a long way to go. We still have things to do, but we're getting there.
So it started from the thinking of what can we do for special ed students, and morphed into this is great for everyone.
Well, I think our district always looked at what was good for everyone. I mean, anytime I would talk about students with disabilities, I was also looking at, well, if we do this will also help these other kiddos. So I think our district kind of had a natural way of thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, the initial conversation was related to special ed, but quickly became clear that UDL was really a framework that ties all our work together.
For me, it started early on when I started to see the connection between universal design for learning and the 10 Common Principles of the Coalition of Essential Schools, the work from Ted Sizer. So we start looking at 10 Common Principles of Essential Schools, and you start talking about students using their minds well. All students use their minds well, which is a big emphasis. Diploma by exhibition, personalizing learning when possible. Clear expectations. You start looking at those common principles, and to me, that I saw a natural connection then as I learned more about universal design for learning. And then the neuroscience and cognitive psychology that supported, the research that supported universal design for learning made it a natural fit for strategies and kind of a framework to fit within the 10 common principles, which I had been very much in favor of and kind of working with ever since I became a high school principal. So I was really excited about that, and then to see those connections, and just like, oh, now here's a way I can see how you create that environment where all students are using their minds well, where you create an environment, a learning environment where you can show what you know and can do through different means, through exhibitions. And so it really started to fit well, personalizing the learning environment when possible. All those things started to fit. So I started making those kind of connections in my mind. So that helped me kind of with our secondary foundation based in the coalition work. It was really kind of easy to make that next leap. I think probably one of our biggest steps then was with what was happening with the state with the new evaluation process. Because take it from where George was and everything like this, now you had that opportunity to create your own teacher evaluation process because that was possible. So rather than using the RISE model or something like this, we tailor-made our teacher evaluation process to reflect Universal Design for Learning as a framework, as an instructional framework. That's 50% of our evaluation. That drove a lot, because now all of a sudden people were on that fringe saying, okay, is this something that's just going to be around for a little bit, just another trend, we're going to move on to something else. All of a sudden now, when they saw it in the evaluation process, and 50% of the rubric being devoted to Universal Design for Learning, it's like, this is real, and I better get on board very quickly. And it made sense to people. And again, we simplified it down from what was at one point 10 pages down to 4 pages. One page capturing the main framework of universal design, and it's really made sense. And we've seen some great results because of that. And I think it again has really helped people make that kind of concrete connection to this is not just something this is good for all kids. This is not just a trend. This is we're corporation is dedicated to this district, to this framework. So that was very powerful for us.
I think another big piece in the history, a huge piece, was Vicki Hirschman, who was the director of patents at the time, introduced us and connected us with CAST. And we have developed a great relationship with CAST. In turn, they have helped us, we've helped them, but we learned probably everything we know around UDL from CAST, and particularly David Rose has spent a lot of time helping us and bringing us along, and Grace Mayo. So I think that was a huge connection in resource and support. Again, we've been able to learn from them. They've used us for some pilot kind of projects that we've both benefited from. So I think that relationship has been. I think without that, we would clearly not be where we are.
To summarize, the main point for me, again, goes back to that first principle of the Coalition of Essential Schools, which is all students use their minds well. Well, what's that look like? And to me, Universal Design for Learning gives it that framework of what that should look like in the classroom.
Have you seen any specific outcomes that you can point to that are positive? I mean, are you seeing any increases in test scores, or it's hard to put that into some sort of quantifiable terms?
Yes.
Okay.
We have seen an increase in the number of, or the percent of students passing I-STEP in every subgroup we have for each year from 2009 through 2014. So literally every subgroup, the percent of students passing has increased every single year throughout that time. And around that 2007-8 is when we really kind of were pretty solid about our adoption of UDL as our district framework and implementation. So we've seen that. And in special education, obviously I'm director of special ed, that's kind of close to my heart. We've seen a significant increase in our students with disabilities graduating with diplomas. Have increased dramatically. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. We have those. And in addition to the students with disabilities increasing at a rate, we've also closed the gap between what was a very large gap of general education graduation rate and student with disabilities back in 2009 to now has really become very, very narrow, and we're talking about AP.
Yeah, I mean, our AP scores and AP participation has gone up as well. And again, I think it goes back to, again, a core for me, again, with the UDL framework is that piece about student variability, which is something we've believed in, this district's believed in for a long time. And again, the UDL framework helped us really address the student variability piece. Also, the idea that it really is a mind shift is that piece about disabilities and ability being contextual. And really, when you start thinking about that, it really changes things. And so again, we weren't worried about our standardized test scores. We were just worried about good instruction. And that's kind of interesting because one of those things we like to say is there are not standardized students. Standardized test scores, I mean, it just creates this cognitive dissonance in you, and again, in education, because there aren't standardized students. And so, but when we started getting that question all the time, as people came in to visit us about what we're doing in Universal Design for Learning, and again, that question always comes up. So, bottom line, we're still held to this accountability, whether it's valid or not, we're still held to state accountability. What's that look like? So we start, oh my gosh, look at this. We weren't really tracking that. All of a sudden we look back and said, look at this. So we start now incorporating that into our presentations because that's about what, a lot of people want to know that. Right. Again, bottom line is, so how's this reflecting into the state accountability system? Here it is. Here's the evidence of that. Now we're going to have to start all over again with the new testing and the new tests and everything like this. But, we feel confident that we'll see the same pattern happen again.
And I think the reason we're seeing that, and again, we didn't, like Bill said, the reason we looked at those is because people kept asking us from around the country, because our superintendent testified in front of the Senate Help Committee, and those are all questions that came out of, well, how do you know? And so we thought, well, we better look at these scores because everybody else cares about them. And I think that was useful. I think the big piece about the increase, the increase in students taking our advanced placement courses and the percent of those students passing AP going up, is that we don't have any prerequisite requirements for our AP classes. Any student can take an AP class. So it's not like you have to have passed this, and this, and then you can do AP. Anybody can take them. So it's kind of an open enrollment, and we're seeing increased enrollment and increased scores. So we think that's a real positive.
Again, it goes back to that whole concept of ability and disability being contextual. And I think that's a real mind shift for a lot of people to make that connection, because it's just like, it is different. We're all different. We all have our own strengths and our own passions, and we all have those areas where, we really want to excel, and we can excel if we're in that right context. And again, wherever you are, you can be successful. And it's, again, finding that success, it's making those students successful. And I think that's one of the great things about universal design, is it really finds, how every student can be successful and find their mark.
Any advice for schools that are thinking about taking this journey? Advice for dealing with the roadblocks that come along the way, or things that if you look back and think, I wish we would have kind of approached this differently?
For me, I think one of the big things, again, advice-wise, is really going back to, what are your core beliefs? Do you truly believe in student variability? If you truly believe in student variability, if you believe in the neuroscience and cognitive psychology that supports student variability, which how can you argue that? But if you have that philosophy, if you have that at your core beliefs, then it looks like, build your instructional framework around those beliefs. For us, universal design addresses student variability. It addresses students at the margin, because you're thinking about that all the time. I mean, you're not just thinking about average. Again, what is average? And so that whole idea about, thinking about the myth of average is so important. So again, as you develop your own core beliefs, then you start building your framework from that.
I think, in looking back, the one thing we probably would do different, we would do it in a different order. I would suggest that early on, if you're looking at UDL as your district-wide framework, is to really sort of look at the principles and then look at the other kinds of, or look at the initiatives that are going on in your district. Because a lot of times people think, well, UDL is another initiative. And UDL is not an initiative, it's a framework. And in our district, it is over everything we do. And we always ask the question, if you come, for example, if you come to us and say, well, I have this great grant opportunity. Historically, school districts would jump on it because you use the word grant, and that means money. And our first question is, how will that support the implementation of the principles and guidelines of UDL? And if you can't answer that, then we're not interested. So we've kind of gotten to that mindset. But early on, what we didn't do was really help everyone understand how a lot of the programs and practices that were in place were supportive of the principles. Now, about a year or two into it, we did go through some activities with principals and teachers, helping some folks see how things were aligned and identify things that weren't aligned that maybe we don't need to do anymore. So I would have that conversation early so that people understand UDL is a framework or an umbrella, and what you're doing needs to support the principles. And that way people don't just put it over here in this silo, and so that you have a whole bunch of silos.
Another important piece early on for us was that idea for so many people, they're thinking about UDL because of CAST and, being that special technology support. Again, we wanted to get away from that right away, that it doesn't really have to be based in technology. I mean, you can do things in a classroom with no technology and still make a learning environment that is universally designed for all students. So that was a big piece as well, because I mean, some people right away want to say, well, I don't have the technology to do that. It doesn't take technology. And we had a lot of our folks who were really getting that concept, help explain that and demonstrate how you could take any kind of classroom and make it universally designed for all students. So again, making sure that your instruction is accessible, your curriculum is accessible, and your assessments are accessible to all students. That was a really important piece as well.
Okay, well, thank you both for giving your time.
I had one more thing.
Oh, you can give one more thing, absolutely.
I think when you think about universal design for learning too, it can be applied in any district, whether it be a small rural district or an urban district. I think one of the things that we're also working on really hard with is looking at the UDL guidelines and incorporating and including cultural responsiveness within those guidelines. And that's a challenge I think a lot of districts look at is, how do we really get cultural responsiveness without having it be another add-on? Well, again, when you start really getting into the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, you can see how cultural responsiveness can easily be woven into the guidelines. And so for an urban district, I think that's very critical. I mean, it's critical for all districts, but I think for urban districts especially, when you really look at the students and experiences they bring in, the variability they bring in because of what their environment's like. So that's pretty critical, again, I think, especially if you think about urban districts. But again, rural districts, it's the same thing.
One last thought, since we're getting to do with last thought. A big shift in thinking has to be, we're looking at the learning environment, the classroom, and learning environment can be anywhere. It could be, if you're a speech therapist, it could be the hallway or the closet down the hall or whatever it may be, the therapy room. And we're really looking at how do you design that environment and build in options so that all kids can be successful. And we need to start looking at, or asking the question of what kind of supports do the teachers, regular ed teachers need? And the supports really aren't about the students. And then I guess it's shifting that student thinking to staff and systems thinking, because we're kind of ingrained in our mind as, well, this student needs this, needs a TA or needs this or this or this to be successful in a regular ed classroom. And the question really needs to shift of, those kids are already in there. They're your students. What does the teacher need to help the student be successful? So it's really allocating resources based on teacher needs, which will change and be variable again because the disability is contextual. So that's a huge mind shift. It's not student-based resources, it's teacher-based resources, because the teachers are the ones who are creating the environment.
It really does move that thinking from student deficit, which is so easy to default to,
right,
to instructional systematic deficit, looking at that, which again is that big shift. Hey, let's not fix the kids, let's look at how we can fix instruction.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.